Hi,
Good morning, Chris Ann. Do we, I don't see.
We're just waiting on Joanne.
Joanne, right.
Yeah. We have quorum, but we're just waiting on her. We'll give her another minute.
Sure, let's give her a couple minutes.
Yeah. Oh, she's coming in now.
Okay, great.
So just give me 1 minute and we can get started.
Thanks, Chris Ann. Morning, Julie.
Good morning. Sorry.
Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
Chair, we have quorum and we can begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris Ann. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have quorum. Let's start, Chris Ann, if you could read the land acknowledgement, please.
Sure. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you very much. Next up, does anyone have a conflict of interest that they need to declare, Julie or Joanne?
Go.
Hearing none, I will assume that there are no conflicts to deal with. So first item of business is to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Julie, could I ask you to move those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. And all in favor? That's carried. Okay, we are virtual again for this meeting, but given that there are just the three of us who are members, I think we can handle the question and answer thing fairly informally. But I'll remind you that we are live on the TTC YouTube channel. The first item of business today, main item of business, is to review the financial statements, and we're going to start by having a report from the external auditors. And I think we have the lead on that, Kevin Travers, here to go through that. Kevin, are you here?
I am. Good morning.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm joined today by Regan Travers, and the two of us are going to go through our audit findings report. We're going to hit the highlights of the document. We don't intend to do a page by page, but we'll reference the page number that we're speaking to as we go through it, if that's all right. So I'm going to start with some comments with respect to our executive summary or overall comments with respect to the audit itself. So the comments I would make with respect to the overall status is that we are complete our work. We are in a position to issue our unqualified audit opinion for the financial statements of the TTC for the year ended December 31st, 2021. The only items that are outstanding at this point in time are the items that should be outstanding, and that is namely completing our conversations with this group this morning, and then ultimately understanding that the board approves the financial statements, at which time we'll receive from management their signed representation letter. We were able to conduct our audit in accordance with the plan that was presented to this group some months ago. If I go to the second page of our executive summary, we did not note any control deficiencies, which were considered to be significant deficiencies in internal control over financial reporting. Had we encountered any such deficiency, we would have brought it forward to this group's attention this morning. We confirm that we are independent of the TTC as we are required to be as external auditors. And just a further note on that, we are independent of the TTC, but we are required to be independent of the City of Toronto, whom we audit as well, as in addition to all of their controlled entities, including Toronto Transit Commission. We use a global KPMG application such that if any KPMG individual identifies an opportunity to work with the TTC or any of the city's entities, I'm immediately alerted. So prior to the start of any engagement or even the acceptance, I have to approve it directly as the lead audit partner to ensure that it doesn't cross any lines in terms of independence or conflict. In the case of anything that might be where additional judgment might be required, I'm then required to consult with our Department of Professional Practice. So just to provide some additional comfort as to how we ensure that we are independent, there's no risk of any assignment being taken on by KPMG without my knowledge and direct approval. With respect to accounting estimates, we are satisfied with the reasonability of accounting estimates that were developed by management for the purpose of their financial reporting in the current period. If we go to the next 2 slides in our deck, they speak to significant fraud risks that relate to management's ability to override internal controls and the fraud risk that relates to fraudulent revenue recognition. Similarly to when we had this conversation when we presented our plan back a few months ago, I indicated that these fraud risks weren't considered to be necessarily elevated in the case of TTC, but that they are required to be presumed to be in existence whenever we perform any financial statement audit. We are then required to perform design and perform procedures to sufficiently mitigate the risks to an acceptably low level. So those slides just provide additional information on how that was achieved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Regan, who'll take you through the next part of the document.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to walk through the areas of focus. The first item I'm going to address is the passenger services revenue. So total passenger service revenue for the year was 456 million. We perform an entire suite of procedures over the passenger services revenue. Throughout the performance of these procedures, no exceptions were noted. Moving to the next item, it's unsettled accident claims. So this is a significant and complex estimate. The unsettled accident claims is a liability which is computed by management's actuarial expert. We in turn use our actuarial experts to review this computation. Some of the procedures that we perform include we review the actuarial reports, review the methodology and underlying assumptions that are used to formulate the estimate. We also perform testing over the underlying data that's used in the computation. Throughout these procedures, we concluded that the estimate was appropriate. The next item is the employee future benefits. So this is another significant complex estimate as well. The TTC's employee benefits plan includes the post-employment plans, post-retirement plans, and pension plans. At year end, the liability was $850 million. Some of the procedures that we perform here include review of the actuarial reports. We review the methodology and underlying assumptions that are used to formulate the estimate. We also perform testing over the underlying data contained in the valuation. We concluded that the estimate was appropriate. The next item we have is the tangible capital assets. So the TTC is a very capital intensive business. The net book value of the tangible capital assets at year end was $12.4 billion. During the year, the TTC recognized $865 million in additions to the tangible capital assets. Again, we perform a suite of procedures over this. We review the continuity schedule. We also substantively test additions and disposals and vouch them to supporting documentation. We perform analytical procedures over the amortization expense, and no exceptions were noted during our testing. So the next slide I'll discuss is the financial statement presentation and disclosure. So the form, arrangement, and content of the financial statements is appropriate. We did not note any material disclosure omissions in the financial statements. I'll let Kevin carry on here for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Regan. And just a few more remarks from us. The first is the next slide speaks to uncorrected and corrected audit differences. There were no differences that were corrected within the financial statements. There was one item noted as a judgmental uncorrected difference, and it's referenced in Appendix 7 in terms of a representation letter relating to the timing of the recognition of the asset transfer for the Toronto Coach Terminal property between the city and the TTC. It's considered to be a judgmental difference, and it will be corrected ultimately by next period, and it's not material to the financial statements. So that's why it's referenced that way as being a judgmental difference. The appendices to our document will take largely as being read. There is reference to both accounting standards, which will be required to be implemented in the near future, as well as an audit standard, which is required to be implemented by all audits or for all audits for next fiscal period. There's also a listing of changes to or other areas of or that could be of insight to you or of valuable insight to you on Appendix 5. So there's a number of different links that help organize or individuals that provide oversight over financial reporting, some insight as to some of the new topics or emerging topics facing the agendas of audit committees these days. So with that, we'll leave that being the formal presentation that Regan and I have this morning, and we'd be happy to respond to any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'll open it up to questions. Why don't I start with you, Joanne? Do you have any questions for the auditors?
No, I don't have any questions, Chair. I'm just happy to see such a positive report from the auditors, that there's such agreement across the both the team and the audit, the external auditors. Good to see.
Thank you. Julie, do you have any questions?
I don't either. Thanks.
Kevin, I had a couple just process questions.
Sure.
First of all, given that this is another pandemic year audit, can you comment on the processes that you use that might have been different this year than a normal year in terms of the audit that you conducted?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ron. Boy, it's hard to remember what a normal year is like. It's been a couple now, but even prior to the pandemic, we were moving in the direction of being what I would call entirely paperless. So exchange of electronic data in order to conduct the work that we need to do. But that being said, I mean, what happens is all of the meetings that need to take place between management and ourselves to conduct information or to get information, we do so over sites like this to have those direct interactions in that way. We are also where we use a share data site in order to share information confidentially, privately, in order to have access to the different files that we need to do to conduct our work. I do believe into the future, we're going to go back to something that is probably more a little bit of a hybrid or combination. So I would expect over the next year that we'll start to be at clients' premises a little bit more. I don't think there's much of a substitute to have that direct interaction. So I do believe that we're going to get something back closer to that. But I also believe that we now have the ability to do a lot of this work remotely to the extent that we can in an efficient way. I think that we will. So other than that, there really wasn't anything that jumps out as being something that we couldn't do. When it comes to inventory counts and things like that, we still attend in person and have been able to do so with the appropriate safeguards and controls. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. The other general question I'd like to ask is, can you comment on the process of doing the audit with with management? Did you get the appropriate cooperation and support, and were there any difficulties in terms of garnering the information you needed to complete the report? Just general comments on the interactions with management.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Really, we got tremendous support from management during the course of the audit. We had communications throughout the period. We found that management actually provided very well thought out and written communications to us in terms of memos to support their positions on items. We had a number of different conversations throughout the audit process, at pre-planning, during planning, and even actually as we executed our audit. And we received all of the cooperation and responses to our questions on a very timely basis.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And is there anything that you'd like to discuss with the audit committee in camera that would require us to go in camera?
Thanks for the opportunity, and certainly it is best practice to have that type of in-camera conversation with audit committees in general, but we don't have anything that we would raise in a private session that we haven't been able to talk about this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Okay, with that, I think that I will ask the committee to approve the report and forward to the TTC board. Can I have a motion to do that, Joanne?
So moved. I just want to make sure you heard me there.
Yes, thank you. And Julie, you're supportive of that?
Yes, in support. Thank you.
Okay, as am I, so that is carried. So thank you very much, Kevin and Reagan. You're welcome to stay on for the rest of the agenda, but you're also welcome to log off if you have other matters to attend to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, item number 2 is the review and approval of the financial statements, or recommending their approval to the board. Josie, are you going to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everyone. So as you know, the TTC, like all organizations, are required to prepare the annual audited financial statements, which are then consolidated into the city's annual financial statements, and of course are based on public sector accounting standard requirements. So in 2021, our operating funding requirements were fully met thanks to the support of our funding partners through the $796 million in Safe Restart Agreement funding, which funded essentially our COVID impacts. Alex Kassar, our Director of Budgets, Costing and Financial Reporting, is here and available to provide a walkthrough of the statements if the committee so wishes.
I think that would be useful for him to do, and it's a good opportunity for us to say hi to Alex as well. So, Alex, why don't you do that for us, please?
Sure. I'll just, okay, great, excellent. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Josie, for that introduction. And before I start going through the financial statements, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all the contributions that we get to complete our annual financial reporting requirements and through the audit. It requires contributions both within finance and from others within the organization as well. And I'm greatly appreciative for the responsiveness and contributions of everyone. So I'll start going through the statements, starting with the statement of financial position. So the statement of financial position has kind of 3 key groupings, if you will, are the financial assets of the organization, the liabilities, and then the non-financial assets. So starting with the financial assets, the largest amount there is our subsidy receivable balance. And so that's really 2 key components within it, and it's described in greater detail in note 5. But there's a current portion. So these are subsidies approved for both operating and capital through the annual budget process, and was $443 million at year end, and it's collected from the city as funds are required to settle our accounts payable that arise. So we receive the physical cash as we need to settle the accounts payable. And then the other component of the subsidies receivable is what we call other recoverable amounts. And that reflects the city's ultimate obligation related to longer term liabilities. So things such as post-retirement medical and dental benefits. So those are funded from the city on a cash basis, if you will. And so we recognize that ultimately we will get the funding through future budget processes. And so that is separated out and made clear in note 5. In terms of liabilities, the largest liability are employee future benefits. All these amounts are actuarially determined, and the assumptions are described in note 9. So the key components there are the post-retirement medical and dental benefits, which are about total about $600 million, and the post-employee benefits, which are post-employment benefits, I should say, which is essentially the WSIB and LTD liability, which totals about close to $250 million. The other key liability is our accident claims, which is discussed by the auditors as well. So it's largely reflects the TTC essentially self-insures for accident claims through the TTC insurance company. And these amounts represent the amount that was actually determined to settle all claims as of December 31, 2021. So when you take the financial assets and subtract the liabilities, you get to the net debt figure. So essentially that 272 million figure, what it really represents is essentially the non-financial assets for which TTC receives funding as the asset is used, rather than upon acquisition. So essentially, when it comes to inventory, for example, we purchase the inventory, the parts inventory items, and then we receive the funding for it as we use the items out of inventory. And so between the inventory and there's certain capital assets, where the subsidy is received as the assets are used, such as non-revenue vehicles and IT assets. And so that substantially comprises the net debt figure. And then the non-financial assets are substantially, of course, our tangible capital assets that we use to deliver transit services. And as of the end of the year, we had a net book value of $12 billion worth of these assets. And so that's based on historical cost at the time of acquisition, less the amortization that has occurred over the life of the asset. And then these non-financial asset value is added to that net debt number, and you get the accumulated surplus. So substantially that represents essentially the full value of capital subsidies being recognized in the year the asset is acquired, and less, of course, the depreciation that has occurred since asset acquisition. So as such, accumulated surplus is not available for use. It's basically the value we have in the organization to deliver future transit services. Okay, we'll move on to the statement of operations. Okay. So the statement of operations reflects both operating and capital, effectively results during the year. The first section is our operating revenue sources. So of particular note is passenger revenue, obviously continuing to be lower than normal levels due to the continued impact of COVID-19. And that shortfall in passenger revenue was made up through the support of upper levels of government through the Safe Restart Agreement. So within the operating subsidies line, there's, and as it'll be shown in note 14, both the funding received from the Safe Restart Agreement, which was $796 million, and as well as our normal, normal base operating funding. The subsidy revenue includes $855 million in capital subsidies. So capital subsidy revenue is recognized as assets are acquired or constructed, and once all the related eligibility requirements have been met. Expenses on this statement as required by the public sector accounting standards are shown by service. So here you see a conventional transit service and Wheel-Trans, and then there'll be a breakdown in note 16 that kind of shows it by expenditure object or the nature of the expense. And point out as well that you see some probably figures that are larger than what you're used to seeing in terms of some of the management reporting, because these amounts include amortization of the capital assets. And we obviously normally report based on the operating, we normally exclude that when reporting on the operating results. So obviously the revenues less expenses leads to the accounting surplus for the year, which again is substantially the difference between the capital subsidies and the capital asset amortization that occurred during the year. So then there's three additional statements. We keep going to the next page that follow that are required by the standards. The first is a statement of remeasurement gains and losses. And so TTC uses financial derivatives to manage exposure to fluctuating fuel prices. So this statement presents the gains or losses that occur from these contracts. So basically the value that we've effectively locked in at versus where the market is at the end of the year. So then moving on to the next statement, the statement of change in net debt. So as we previously discussed, the balance is primarily the value of the inventory and capital assets not eligible for capital subsidy funding. So this statement then presents all of the in-year changes that impact the net debt balance. And then the final statement is the statement of cash flows. If you go to the next page. And this presents the key drivers of TTC's cash inflows and outflows during the year. So then after this, there's all the notes of the financial statements. I want to kind of scroll through, Chrisanne, I'll just kind of point out a few of them. So the second note there highlights all our accounting policies, so we can keep going through. And then, just a minute, yeah. I think then note 3 coming up here talks about our financial risk, the disclosures that are required, credit risk, and yeah, I can keep going. Currency, liquidity risk, and so what we do to mitigate those risks. We can continue to go through there. There's the subsidy, note 5, the subsidies receivable note that I mentioned earlier. So there's the breakdown between the current portion and the other recoverable amounts, as I mentioned. So we can keep going. Note 8 is the unsettled accident claim, so it discloses all the assumptions that go into the valuation of that liability. So you keep going from there. And note 9, again, all the assumptions that go into the future employee benefits liabilities. A very, very complex section, and we obviously rely on the help of our actuaries to arrive at these estimates for the value of the liability as of the year-end date. So it's quite a long note, but the required disclosures are all there. And we'll keep going through that. And yeah, note 12 highlights the breakdown of our tangible capital assets. So by the different categorization of assets, subways, buses, track work, etc. Keep going. Then if we go to note 14, you'll see the note 14 breaks down the operating subsidies. Like I mentioned, there's the base operating funding, the Safe Restart Agreement, and then a portion of our base funding is actually sourced from provincial gas tax. That's disclosed as well. So you can keep going from there. Note 15 shows our breakdown of our capital subsidies and the funding sources that were recognized during the year. Go from there. And then note 16 has the expenses by object that I mentioned earlier. And as you'll see, we have nearly $2.8 billion of expenses, of which about $2 billion of that was funded through the operating budget. And the difference is primarily that line that you see there, amortization assets funded through capital. Of about close to $700 million. And yeah, and then go to note 18. I'll just point out this presents reserves held by the City of Toronto for TTC's future use. So this note is presented for information. These amounts are held by the city, they're not included in our financial statements, but we provide this disclosure about our reserve balances with the city. And I think that is pretty much all I wanted to highlight. And then the final 2 pages at the back have a consolidation schedule, which has a breakdown of all the balances by TTC entity. So there's TTC, Wheel-Trans, Coach, Terminal, and the Sick Benefit Association. So that brings my walkthrough to a close, but I'm happy to I realized that was a bit fast. So if there's anything, any questions from the committee, I'm happy to go back and go over any particular items.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. That was very helpful. Julie, do you have any questions for Alex or Josie?
Yes, one kind of big one. But first, thanks to both of you and the squad that I'm assuming was involved in getting this thing out and thoroughly prepared. And it's just really maybe in a way an observation and then sort of looking forward. You mentioned the $796 million that's come from the 2 levels of government, which was obviously required in a moment of extreme crisis and was, gratefully received. And I'm personally very pleased that they chinned up the way they did to assist on such a vital service. The question I have is going forward. So TTC ourselves, our auditors just now referred to this part-time going forward. So, in the event that the temperature goes down on COVID and it becomes less of a 5-alarm fire on the desks of government officials, and I'm just interested in how or signaling, I guess, some kind of anxiety, and interested to hear your point of view on what this is going to look like next year. Because we, I think, can comfortably assume that ridership will not rebound fully. And so it isn't as much about this, except that this highlights such a large number. And I'm just interested in your point of view about how we might go about addressing this going forward.
Well, thank you for the question. I'll start. So that was the gap that we had in 2021. As you know, with the budget that was approved for 2022, the gap continues because what we are anticipating, or what we've budgeted for to year end, is a revenue ridership of about 80%. And so the gap was 561 million. Now we are a little bit ahead because the Omicron impact that we and all anticipated in the winter did not materialize with such an impact. However, that doesn't take away the need for the gap to be funded. And so we have we've seen the the announcement from the province and the feds that they're looking to match. Whether they're going to meet 100% is still yet to be known, and we are working through with the city. Going forward, I believe that it will be a slight ramp up because our projections and demand between ourselves and Scott's area, who's doing the customer demand side, continue to see a bit of a gap, knowing that part of our ridership is our workers, downtown in particular, who are using the hybrid model. So there will continue to be a gap. And so we're taking various actions, of course, whether it's through our service plan reset, making sure we're matching service to demand, looking at campaigns to bring people back, trying to assure people of safety in the system. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll get there. And so, of course, we'll be doing everything in our control to try to minimize the impact. But there are some advocacy issues that need to happen that looks at a little bit more sustainable funding, because clearly what the pandemic showed is the vulnerability that transit has, and the TTC in particular, given the ratio of fare revenue to our overall operating subsidy. So I don't think there's an easy answer, Commissioner, to this, other than we have to watch what's happening. And I don't believe any of us think that it's going to rebound to 100% in the short term. So every effort that we can to secure the ridership, add ridership, minimize costs, and advocate for additional gap funding is what we have available to us.
Okay, thank you.
That answers your.
It does, yes, thanks.
Thank you, Julie. So interestingly, I had a conversation with Rick yesterday concerning the TTC's work on developing the next 5-year plan. And the issue that you asked is exactly the issue that I highlighted with Rick as being one of our critical issues for the next 5 years, is really understanding how quickly ridership comes back, and trying to rework our funding model to accommodate that change, and even understanding whether ridership will ever be 100% of what we expected before. Like, there will be natural growth, but I guess the real strategic question for the TTC, or one of them, is the hybrid work model here to stay, and what does it mean for ridership, or how long is that going to be around? So I think it's a really big issue that the company will need to tackle. Joanne, do you have any questions for Alex or Josie?
I do, but just first, perhaps just a comment on this last really important conversation that Julie launched us on, and that is that Josie, good to hear about the efforts that the TTC will make to get people back to ride. But the other aspect of this is to educate the other levels of government. I know they understand this conceptually, but it's always good, I find, if we can put harder data on the table, and that is, to look at the economic value that the transit and moving people to transit brings to the city and to the region, so that it becomes a pretty easy decision on the part of the other levels of government. It's a concrete investment. It isn't just subsidy. It's not a subsidy. It's not an expense. It's an investment. So we change the attitude, because that's what this is really all about. It's not expense. It's investment. So I just and I know all that, but it's always helpful to I think to just state the obvious sometimes. But my question really comes back to there's always really good data in the financials, and that can be very useful to the other parts of the organization that are in charge of operations. So to what extent do you use it to educate it? And a couple of examples, I'm struck by the the assets, we have huge amount of assets, the billions of dollars in assets. And so extending the life of those assets is a good thing. And so in having the conversations with the other parts of the organization that are responsible for that, are those some of the points that you would draw out, that if we can extend the life of these assets, it puts us in a better position? And the other example I would put on the table is the future, the liability, future benefits liability, so that as that unit, that department is looking at these questions and considering it, considering the impact, that they also understand, because it's growing fairly significantly on a yearly basis. It's gonna grow some more. So just understanding that, making sure that the operating parts of the departments get under these numbers. So to what extent do you spend some time doing that with the other departments?
So through the chair, thanks for that question. I must say that to date, I think people are, staff are aware of our assets, the life cycle. We have experts in the organization who maintain them to their life cycle, and to the extent that they can be extended, that is part of the regular work that they do, especially with our fleet in particular. I would also say that, we're actually about to begin some work. We're actually adding some capacity in the organization to start building that financial acumen and understanding, so that we're going to be developing some financial management for non-financial managers training, and awareness, because you're right, particularly on liabilities. I think, folks, generally we would all think of kind of those direct costs, and understanding that, direct costs aren't the only costs here, and that we in fact have various liabilities, whether it's non-productive pay or future liabilities that go along with the added burden of, staffing, for example, right? And so that's a really important piece of work that is work that I'm building up some capacity in the organization to start doing, because it's important that I think we all understand the financials in a way that, and how it impacts all of us in our managing of our resources. So I would agree with you on that, Commissioner, and increasingly trying to use data to bring it together in a way that can help support management in its decision making and its accountabilities.
Good, great. Thank you for that. Those are all the questions I had, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne. I had one question for either Josie or Alex. I'm looking at the employee future benefits, and I did read through the note. I realize that it is fairly sophisticated accounting, but the net is we see continuing significant increases in these liabilities, about a 10% increase on our balance sheet this year, close to. Is there a short answer to what is driving those costs? I'm assuming it's primarily benefit cost inflation, but is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yes. So there's a number of factors. Yes. So the forecast does include expected increase in health costs over time. So that's one issue. The employee population growth is another. So these plans were actually instituted in the early 2000s. And so there's still probably an element of time maturing. Of course, the number of employees has grown over time. So as you add more employees that become eligible, then that has a factor on the liability. One thing that might help us moving forward, kind of indirectly, is what's happening with interest rates, because obviously the value of these liabilities is discounted based on the interest rates at the time at the end of the year, and as interest rates go up, then the value of the liability at a point in time is one factor that could bring it back down. But yes, there's an it's really, I guess, driven both by the costs and the number of employees. I would say are probably the two big drivers of this.
Okay. It just strikes me, it's a major cost item for the organization, and I realize that it's it's difficult to control because of it's a negotiated item, certainly with our employees. But I think that this is another area where we may need to bring in some additional focus on trying to control that cost as best we can. And it's something that many organizations are facing, is spiraling benefit costs. So it just highlights in these statements as a real material cost to the TTC. Okay, I didn't have any other questions. Josie, perhaps a clarification. Is the audit committee approving these financial statements, or are we recommending them to the board for approval?
So through the chair, I believe we're recommending them for approval to the board, because then they will move forward to the city from there.
Okay, that's what I assumed. So, so on that basis, can I ask for a motion to recommend these statements for approval by the board? Julie, why don't I ask you for that motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
And Joanne, you're in favor? Good. Okay, that's approved. Thank
So
you very
Ron,
much.
just a technicality here. The recommendations say that we need to approve the report, number one, and two, recommend to go to the board. So just in the interest of thoroughness, we may need to have.
Yeah, that's
both.
why I was clarifying, because I don't actually think we have the authority to approve the financial statements unilaterally.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
not the
we
statements.
only have the authority to recommend them.
Yeah, it's not the statements, it's the report, which I think includes the statements. So then the statements themselves go forward for approval. Anyway, it probably doesn't matter, but that's
Okay.
what the notes say that were presented to us, that we have the two things.
Okay. Well, why don't we agree that we absolutely can approve the report, and we are hereby doing, and we also can recommend the financial statements for approval by the board. And I will leave it to Chris-Anne to make sure that the motion that we've approved reflects that. Is that okay, Chris-Anne?
Noted, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Julie. Okay, next item is number 4, approving the accounts receivable, I think it is. Josie, would you like to speak briefly to this one?
So through the chair, I believe we have item 3, which is the draft annual.
Oh, sorry, I missed item 3. Yeah, item 3 is the annual report. So yes, please speak to that. Sorry.
So each year we prepare an annual report, and this report just essentially presents the outline for the annual report that will go forward once the consolidated financial statements are approved by the board on June 23rd. So it just lays out really the content, the outline for the report.
Yeah, and that looked fine to me. Julie or Joanne, do you have any questions on that?
I didn't, Chair.
No.
Nor
Julie,
me.
no. Okay, Joanne, can you make a motion to approve that report? Okay, and Julie, you're supportive?
Yes.
That's approved. Thank you, Josie. Okay, now item number 4, the uncollectible accounts receivables. If you could speak to that, Josie.
Sure, thank you. So through the chair, so this report is another annual report that we do, and we submit this annually for your information. Essentially, it identifies our uncollectibles for the year that must be written off. So for 2021, that amount totals $11,617.48. The report outlines our historical write-off and collection rates. And for 2021, we're just under 100% collection, given that our annual receipts are $193 million. And so this particular write-off amount is typically associated with uncollectibles after all efforts have been made to collect these unpaid accounts. And so this is what is required for 2021. If you have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Josie. Any questions on that?
Just a quick one, Chair.
Yep.
Good to see the numbers so small, but how big an effort do you put behind it? What's the expense side of trying to collect? Is it is it worth having a higher uncollectible if you save more money in the effort?
So we do try our own efforts first, and from a due diligence perspective, we do try to go through a collection agency. I honestly don't know what the cost effort is per individual, but this particular $11,000 had essentially about 6 or 7 former staff for which we tried to regain funds from. So you're right. Maybe it's not, and I'll actually take a look at that. But as an organization, we do try to ensure that we're getting all our money back.
Yeah, and I agree with that. So I'll just leave it with you. It's
You're right.
your responsibility. I'll leave it with you to look after. So thank you for this.
Okay, Joanne, will you move receipt of this item?
I'll move receipt.
Okay, and Julie, you're supportive?
Yes.
Okay, that's passed. Okay, item 5 is the annual safety, health, and environmental report. Betty, are you here to talk to this?
Yes, I am, Chair. Just give me one moment. I'm just, I have a slide deck here. I'm just going to share if I can get there. Just a minute. Oops, that's the wrong one. Just a minute. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I normally don't have. Give me one sec. And I think my video is not working, so my apologies. Let me just fix that as well. There we are.
Oh, there we go. Hello.
Okay. Just changing it. Just a sec. All right. Can you see the screen there?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
We can. Thank you, Betty.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So today's presentation will provide you with an overview of our annual Safety, Health, and Environment Management System review, focusing on performance indicators, updates on our projects and initiatives, as well as our goals and objectives. A review of TTC's Safety, Health, and Environment Management System is conducted on an annual basis, as you're aware. This review evaluates the management system for the purpose of ensuring its continued suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. The current review that we looked at assessed the period from Q4 2020 to Q3 2021. Under safety and environmental legislation, TTC board members are considered directors of a corporation and have prescribed duties to take all reasonable care to ensure that the TTC complies with safety and environmental legislation and all regulatory orders. As such, they should be aware of TTC's safety management system and its performance. So this slide shows you our how we manage the safety management system is really how we manage our safety, health, and environment risks. So occupational health and safety, operational safety, and environmental risks. And it's really, the management system is really a comprehensive and proactive approach to managing safety risks by integrating all processes into a continual improvement cycle, which you see here, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, which is common to other management system standards as well, like ISO 9001. But what we're following here is ISO 45001 as an example. The annual review is part of the ACT function and serves to continually improve our safety management system. It includes the following inputs like performance indicators, impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, safety, health, and environment projects and initiatives, audits and investigation findings, and regulatory oversight. In terms of the COVID pandemic, it did continue to impact our TTC ridership and traffic volume, which did impact customer injury rates and collision rates during the review period. It also did place additional demand on available resources and impacted the implementation timelines of several projects and initiatives. Throughout the pandemic, the TTC has continued to implement control measures to protect the health and safety of its employees, customers, and the public. The next several slides provide information on adverse trends in key performance indicators, including those related to occupational health and safety, customer and public health and safety, and security. So I'll just take you through that. The first one here is occupational health and safety. The 5-year lost time injury rate is showing an upward trend, and that trend is driven by an upward trend in emotional trauma injuries. So acute emotional event and assault injury events are contributing towards that upward trend that we're seeing in our emotional trauma injuries. And we've updated the slide to show over the past 7 months, we are still seeing that LTIR increasing. The increase that we're seeing more recently, you see that spike in the P1 is due to an increase in biological injury events, and that's due to the spread of the Omicron variant. However, the acute emotional event and assault injury events have also been contributing to this recent increase. So what have we been doing to address these trends? The TTC does have a suicide prevention program and action plan. We've initiated a psychological health and safety project to identify and evaluate psychological health and safety hazards and their impact on workers. And we've established an assault prevention action plan. I'll speak to that more later on. Working groups are in place to track and monitor progress of these action plans. Moving on to customer and public health and safety, there is an upward trend in the customer injury incident rate over the 5-year period. The upward trend is being driven by an upward trend in bus, subway station related, and subway vehicle related injury rates. However, this is mostly attributed to the decrease in ridership during the pandemic. Over the past 7 months, the good news is that the customer injury incident rate has been on a downward movement due to an increase in our ridership. In terms of actions being taken on this end, include messaging on social media to promote reminders about slip, trips, and falls, and safety on board moving vehicles. Moving on to suicide attempts rate, there is an upward trend in our suicide attempts rate over that 5-year period. The significant increase at the start of 2020 can be attributed to the decrease in subway ridership due to the pandemic. Over the past 7 months, the suicide attempts rate has been on a downward movement, which is good news due to the decrease in the number of suicide attempts and the increase in ridership. Overall, to address the overall trend, the TTC has, as I mentioned, established a suicide prevention program and action plan to help reduce suicide incidents. We are studying the feasibility of retrofitting existing stations with platform edge doors and implemented training improvements, which include providing suicide prevention e-learning to customer-facing employees in the subway system. Moving on to security. Over the 5-year period, there is an upward trend in crimes against customers, crimes against employees, and unauthorized at track level. Over the 2-year period, we did see an upward trend in crimes against employees and in the unauthorized at track level. In terms of the last 5 months, crimes against employee rates has been increasing due to that increase in assaults and threats. The TTC has implemented projects and initiatives to address this increase, including the Assault Prevention Action Plan, which, as I said, I'll speak to on a separate slide, and providing frontline and community support. So frontline support that's related to increasing uniform presence throughout our stations. And in terms of the community support, that's engagement with community partners like Streets to Home. So this slide provides an overview of some of the key safety, health, and environment projects and initiatives with a focus on those that have a significant impact across the organization. I'll highlight a couple here and then I'll go into a bit more detail on the next several slides. So just one to note is the subway air quality. That initiative was conducted from 2018 to 2020 by Health Canada to evaluate measures taken to improve air quality in the subway system. The initiative measured levels of fine particulate matter, also known as PM 2.5, on our subway platform, as well as inside the trains. It determined that air quality in TTC subway had improved since 2011, in part due to the change from T1 to TR trains, as well as the implementation of ATC on line 1, which has optimized train acceleration, deceleration, and braking, helping to minimize the amount of friction braking required. The TTC is committed to monitoring levels of subway PM 2.5 and evaluating mitigation strategies. Right now, we are in the process of arranging air monitoring to determine mentioned the impact from filter upgrades that we did on our T1 and TR trains. We did this in part as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We upgraded our filters on our subway fleet from MERV 6 all the way to MERV 13, but this is also beneficial as part of addressing subway PM 2.5 levels. So we will be doing that monitoring shortly. The other thing I just want to highlight is business continuity management. In 2021, we began the work to establish the business continuity function within the Safety and Environment Department. Our current focus is on recruitment as we build out the section to ensure we have the resources required to implement a roadmap of program activities. Now, I want to go into detail on the next couple slides about some of the initiatives I mentioned. At least one of them I did mention earlier was about the Assault Prevention Action Plan, and you've probably heard about this as well. A 10-point action plan was developed to address increasing trends in employee assaults. The plan was endorsed by our Safety Executive Committee and communicated on the first Transit Worker Assault Awareness Day on December 17th, 2021. This plan builds on established programs and recent initiatives, focusing on action items in the areas of data analysis, education and training, engagement and communication, policies and procedures, and incident response and support. Some examples include a development of a specialized training program focusing on de-escalation, a formation of a joint labor management committee, delivering customer and employee safety campaigns, and as well as engaging with community partners through streets to home, focus tables, and Safe TO initiatives. All these deliverables are actively tracked to monitor the progress of the items. The other one I wanted to highlight was our Safety Connect safety management system software. In 2018, we initiated a software project to manage all of our safety and environmental processes and data. We internally branded this as Safety Connect, and after considerable configuration, data migration, the software went live in September of 2020, and departments have been onboarded in stages for using the system for incident reporting, investigation, and corrective action tracking. So we've onboarded 5 maintenance departments at this point: bus maintenance, streetcar maintenance, rail cars and shops and materials management, and also streetcar infrastructure. And we're now turning our focus to operation group departments. And there's going to be configuration of additional modules that's already underway related to occupational hygiene, environmental, and occupational health. A couple of other programs, naloxone program. So in November 2020, the TTC determined it would continue the naloxone program with special constables. The expansion of the program to other customer-facing groups is currently under review. We do have a corporate program that's been drafted, outlining the roles and responsibilities surrounding the administration, use, and oversight of naloxone. The other important inspection program I want to highlight is the Track Level Safety Observation Program. In February 2020, the Safety and Environment Department began conducting track level safety observations during night shift operations to monitor work zone compliance. We did add 2 additional track level night safety officers in 2021, bringing the total now to 4 employees who are fully dedicated to conducting these observations on the night shift and providing that oversight. And the observations they were conducting also included monitoring compliance for COVID-19 control measures. Regulatory oversight. So regulatory agencies such as the Ministry of Labor, Training and Skills Development attend TTC facilities to monitor legislative compliance, respond to complaints, and follow up on incidents. During the review period, occupational health and safety incidents resulting in a regulatory interaction did increase from 77 to 147. The largest increases were due to safety complaints and Section 52 notices, which are resulting from COVID-related concerns and notification of occupational illness. For COVID, we do need to report those to the ministry. The number of orders increased from 11 to 17. All orders issued to the TTC have been complied with and are considered to be closed. Just moving on to our goals, just briefly, I'm not going to go into all the detail. We didn't make any changes to our deck of goals. There's 9 corporate safety, health, and environment goals. They're categorized by short-term, mid-term, and long-term timelines or assigned for future development. And each of those goals have corresponding objectives, and they're outlined in the attachment 1 of the report. In terms of the short-term objective, this table highlights those key short-term objectives under those 9 goals, and implementation of these ones is in progress, and they're expected to be completed by Q2 2022, so shortly, or just beginning of Q3 2022. So recommendations, it is recommended that the Audit Risk and Management Committee first approve the approach to continuously improving the effectiveness of TTC's Safety, Health, and Environment Management System, identifying priority safety, health, and environment issues, and developing TTC's safety, health, and environment goals and objectives as described in this report, and two, to forward this report to the TTC board for information. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Betty. Excellent report. Let's go to questions. Julie, can I start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Betty. I guess my overwhelming observation about this very thorough report was there was for me it was the treatment of COVID, and I'm just wondering if you can maybe clarify, because it seemed to be a backdrop on a number of these initiatives. You know, it obviously changed certain percentages that we see on various things that we track because ridership was reduced because of COVID. And I'm just interested in hearing your comments on the situation, the risks, this health risks to both employees and customers relating to COVID itself, and the way that you sort of pick that up, track that, whatever it is that you do with it, so that we can monitor it, especially now that we're seeing a number of external factors. Number one, mask mandates. Number two, the decrease, the you know, of the current iteration of COVID. Here's hoping it's the last one, but you know, one doesn't know. So it's just this kind of, we're in a changing environment on a number of fronts here, and I'm just wondering, both retrospectively and going forward, what your department's doing with this.
Thanks for the question. So from the beginning of this pandemic, starting in 2020, we've been working very closely with Toronto Public Health and public health officials, making sure that whatever measures we put in place, that they are in support of. So I didn't go into the detail of that in this report, but we've done a number of things, both on the employee side as well as on the customer side. So I'll start with the employee side. So we did implement right away a process for essentially monitoring or tracking of COVID cases with our workforce. So we have a robust process for doing that, and we're actually still continuing to do that. To be honest, it's a contact. It's called contact tracing. So if an employee comes forward with symptoms of COVID or is positive COVID, they would have to report that to their manager, and of course, that information gets documented as part of a contact tracing form, so we can then determine who in the workplace was exposed, so then we can take actions to minimize any transmission. So that process still exists, and we've been doing that from the beginning. And you heard me mention about the reporting to the ministry. And of course, alongside that, that's more on the monitoring part, but we had very strict measures put in place related to, physical distancing, related to mandatory masks. All those control measures were done. In some cases, we were going above and beyond what public health officials were recommending. And yes, we've eased up on some of those, but to be frank, we still are mandating it in our workplace for certain situations. So in meeting rooms, in conference rooms. So post June 11th, we will continue to have those very specific situations where we will continue to mandate that. And just generally speaking, because of the measures we take in place, we were actually able to minimize the number of outbreaks we had in our workplace setting. So I think it does indicate that, we did everything we can. We did take those extra measures to ensure the safety of our employees, and it did result in actually reducing that transmission. So we're very mindful of that. So moving on to our customers, as you know, we were the first agency prior to even the province announcing and making it mandatory on transit to make it mandatory for customers in July of 2020. And following that, of course, the province did mandate it as well for public transit. But we've had a number of initiatives on that end. Scott Haskell's team has been monitoring, related to customer mask usage throughout the pandemic, and also the organization has through our frontline staff provided customers with masks throughout this process, and we will continue to do that. Even though that mask mandate has been lifted, we are strongly recommending that customers wear masks when they're on transit, and we will continue to monitor for now the customer use, mask use, as well as do the distribution of the masks. So those are, I think, some of those efforts. And the other thing is, in terms of technology, I mentioned, you heard me say about the filtration. So we're always looking at ways to make improvements. We did look at that for our vehicles. So it was not only for our subway fleet, but also on all of our modes, we did upgrade our filters to ensure better filtration on our vehicles. And of course, we did have the disinfection efforts as well, as you know, but that's not the primary mode for COVID transmission. But regardless, we're still continuing with that, albeit at a scale back approach. But yeah, those are all the different measures that we've taken. Sorry for the long answer there, but I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I think it's important, and I know it maybe didn't fit in with the stuff that you track, years past and years forward. Just out of curiosity, did we have a choice in the mask mandate? So the mask mandate's been lifted in the province.
Yes. So in terms of that, we've had numerous discussions both with our colleagues in Toronto Public Health, as well as Dr. Moore's office on sort of the approach to take, as well as our GTHA partners, our transit partners. And we wanted to make sure that we are aligned. So in terms of the public health guidance, I think it's important to note that we always want to be following that. And based on the current situation for COVID, we are seeing, improvement in terms of the numbers. So it made sense to sort of move from a mandatory to recommended, and that again was based on that discussions we had with our colleagues. But we did, just to point out, I forgot to mention, we are continuing to mandate it for Wheel-Trans operations. So paratransit, because of the vulnerable group that they do carry, we felt that it was important, and we did that in consultation with our public health officials. So all of this was done, as I said, in consultation with all the appropriate folks, and I think it is the right thing to do, but knowing that we're always monitoring. So if we see any changes in terms of the COVID situation, of course, we would take a different approach. But for now, I think this is the right decision to make.
That's all from me. Thanks, Ron.
Sorry, I was muted. Joanne, any questions?
Just a couple of points. Thank you, Chair. Betty, thank you for the report. Very comprehensive, very open. Just a couple of comments first, and that is that I think it's really important that we have this level of transparency around the safety, health, and environment issues and system that we have in place. I think it's important to share this information and to make it clear, make it available to, not just internally behind the scenes. But a couple of questions. So first, the effectiveness of this plan really goes to the question of whether you feel that you're getting the right level of cooperation across the organization, that those, first of all, people under the departments understand, everyone understands the issues but they also understand their role in what they, what they have to do in order to execute on this. So your comment on that?
Thank you for the question. We get great cooperation. I mean, anytime we're rolling out any programs or initiatives, we do involve all the stakeholder groups, and whatever we are developing, just to note, it is done in consultation. It's not done, in isolation. So our department works very closely with the operating groups and other, stakeholder departments to put any policies, programs together to ensure that it can be operationalized, so that, obviously the work that we do is based on industry best practice, industry standards, whether they're CSA standards, whatever it is, and we take that and we put requirements around that makes sense for TTC. So it is important that departments work closely with us, and they do. And in a lot of cases, we set up working groups in order to achieve that. And so that's more at that sort of frontline management level. But we also have a monthly safety executive meeting. It is a meeting of all the executives, but all department heads, that level of management is also invited, and they get to hear about, in terms of the transparency that we're talking about, the metrics that I talked to you about today, they are part of that discussion at every month's safety executive meeting, and any other safety issues that are need to be highlighted or at those meetings. So that's an opportunity for those operating group departments and other department heads to hear about these issues. And of course, they're also there to present and let us know what actions they're taking with respect to some of these issues that are coming up. So I think we do have a very good governance set up through these various, through the Safety Executive Committee and also these other working groups when we're developing programs and rolling out initiatives.
Good. That sounds quite robust. And speaking of governance, of course, our role as a committee is in the governance sphere, and for us to do our job as a committee and to give you and the organization and the right direction, but also the board the right information. We need pretty clear information. We need to make sure we understand the issues. So I want you to, I don't need an answer today, but part of the reports that you bring to us, think about how you can demonstrate progress. There's a lot of really good stuff here, the initiatives and the trends and so on. So there's good stuff here, but think about how you will bring us a report around progress, but also what didn't work, because sometimes, we learn a whole lot more from initiatives that didn't work, and sharing those as opposed to thinking of them as failures. I always think of, that something that doesn't work as a learning experience rather than, oh, I did the wrong thing. Because then okay, I can take that one off and I can do something that's more useful. So let me leave that with you. Think about the kind of how you report progress to us so that we fully understand what's working, what's not working, and also that we're able to give you the right level of advice and the board the level of advice that they would expect from us as a committee. So that's all I had, Chair.
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Betty. So I had a couple of questions for you as well, Betty. The first is on the employee side. As part of our employee benefit package, do our employees have access to mental health support in, counseling, that type of program?
Yes, they do. That's a program that's administered through our occupational health and well-being department. But yes, they do. They have access to various mental health resources. We also have the EFAP program that's available to our employees as well. But to answer your question, yes, we do.
Okay, great. The other question I had is around bus technology. Where are we in terms of using driver assist technology for our buses? Like, I just got a new car recently and it practically drives itself when you let it. And I know that there's a lot of emerging technology on that front. Are we using any of that kind of technology? Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, my
Chair.
phone was ringing.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Can you comment on the technology we're using in the buses?
I'm just looking to see if Bem Case is on. I think he would be better at answering this question for you. Do you mean for like driverless technology? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and it's not about making our buses driverless.
Okay.
It's more about do we use any of the available technology like lane assist technology, or the technology that tells you if you're going to hit something or slows
Yeah.
you down automatically if you're going to hit something. Those types of technologies, are they integrated into any of our new bus purchases?
So I know there was a pilot, there was some work on that regarding, flashing lights or some kind of turn type of technology. I don't have the details for you right now. I can look into it and get back to you on it, but I know there was a pilot maybe a year or two ago, and I'm not sure where that stands right now. I don't know if any of my other colleagues on the line here have any information on that. But I can certainly look into it for you and get that information. Unfortunately, I don't have a status on that, but I know we were looking into it.
Okay.
Hi, it's Ben
I
Case
see
here.
Rich is on. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. To answer your question, sorry, I was just observing through YouTube there. But so our latest procurement of electric buses is actually on the street now, as you know. It does include a set of options that we're requesting of the vendors to provide driver safety assist technology. There are several tiers of this technology. Some are just kind of warnings to the driver and provide some blind spot indication, this type of thing. And it goes right up to close to fully automated, which would be similar to your car, the best of what automotive industry can offer today. We know that only one of the available manufacturers, or we believe only one of the available manufacturers, has a mature product in this area. And so we couldn't make it a requirement across the entire procurement. But we do intend nonetheless to option, if a vendor or multiple vendors can offer this option, we do intend to exercise the option on some number of buses, perhaps 5 to 10 initially, and allow for provisioning of this technology, because there's some systems like drive-by-wire technology that needs to be built in. But the point is that we have the full system implemented on perhaps 5, and we undergo some trials that we've got planned with the City of Toronto, U of T, using the CNA Proving Ground for AV technology in various applications, including on-street, but also garage automation.
Okay, so it sounds like this is kind of an emerging area, Ben. It's not mature technology when it comes to bus technology.
That's exactly right. I think it's probably, in terms of the commercial availability of proven systems in this area, we're probably 5 to 10 years behind the automotive industry.
Wow, that's really interesting, because we could certainly use the additional safety features. Okay, well, it sounds like you're on top of it. I appreciate that that response. Okay, I didn't have any other questions, so I think, Joanne, if I could ask you to make a motion to adopt the staff recommendations on this, which is to approve the approach and to forward the report to the TTC board for information, if you'll make that motion.
So moved.
Okay. And Julie, you're supportive?
Yes, seconded. Thank you.
Okay, that's approved. Thank you very much, Betty. Great report.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay. Item 6 is an update on our audit risk and compliance flexible work plan. Christine, could you briefly comment on that, please?
For sure. Well, I'm just waiting for my video to show up. Hopefully it does.
There you go. We can see you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I thought, given that this is our last ARMC meeting for the year, I wanted to take the opportunity to explain what key activities ARC is planning to undertake for the remainder of the year, which I outlined in the table attached to the report. So obviously, as I go through it, feel free to stop me, or if you wish just to sort of skip my commentary and just go to questions, I'm kind of open to what you're comfortable with.
Go ahead and give us a quick rundown, Christine, and then we can open to questions.
Okay, all right. So before I get into the details, I think it's paramount to sort of acknowledge that ARC's response to the pandemic and COVID restrictions, protocols, and the sudden direction to work from home in 2020 certainly did impact us and shifted our attention and resources from conducting, what could have been considered traditional comprehensive assurance audit work to supporting executives in any way we could, as TTC had to, of course, quickly respond to unprecedented change and in some cases life-changing risks, as you heard from Betty. So we did consciously provide more advisory services to ensure changes to processes and the implementation of new processes that change brought still took into consideration, to the best of their ability, the design of controls to address the key risks, as well as to enhance management's understanding of the potential impact that those changes made. And in particular, in 2020, ARC did support the development of initial continuity of operations and staff resiliency plans. And in late 2020, we initiated an independent review of the emergency management business continuity function, the results of which did set the stage for the development of a more robust and resourced program within the safety department going forward, as Betty mentioned. In 2021, we continued to provide the same type of support where needed and requested, but a key focus of our attention was bringing that executive compliance certificate to fruition, the aim of which was to enhance the accountability and help drive a compliance culture. Specifically, having done the preliminary research and exploration of best practices, we then partnered with TTC Legal to ensure that executives understood the intent behind the executive certificate sign-off process and gave them comfort to sign the first one by providing legal education sessions. And then this work, of course, resulted in the inaugural submission late last year. So now in 2022, as the TTC works to learn, rebuild, and hopefully emerge stronger post the immediate pandemic crisis, we thought it was a good opportunity and prudent time for TTC to review its current risk landscape and risk culture and the processes and resources dedicated to supporting those business groups and risk owners to drive risk-based decision making. So similar to what we did in 2020 to bring more visibility to the needs around EMBC function, and again to the 2021 around the legal compliance risks, ARC is initiating an independent review via the use of a third-party consultant to review TTC's risk management program, and we anticipate recommendations will be put forth on how best to modernize the program to ensure it's pragmatic and integrated with other business continuity and emergency preparedness frameworks, so as not to be siloed, but instead to drive an end-to-end business approach to risk and resiliency management. Also, I expect recommendations to be put forth on a resource model that best supports the business groups and risk owners. And perhaps strikes a balance between embedding risk advisors within key operational areas or projects, like what was done for the ECLRT project, to really ensure deeper risk identification and assessment and identification of interdependencies, application of risk thresholds and metrics, but also perhaps a group of centralized corporate level resources to drive consistency of the approach, use of tools, risk appetite policy management, and corporate level reporting. And finally, I think there'll be recommendations put forward around the governance structure that should align with current best practice, one of which I'm familiar with is the 3 lines model, which is becoming more well understood and applied. by risk professionals to clarify the roles and responsibilities within an organization and ensures that risk management is integrated into everything we do. So ARC is currently working on developing the scope of work for this review with input from the Chief of Staff and the Deputy CEO. We're hoping the results of the review will set the stage for how best to position and resource the implementation of agreed upon recommendations. But this review will take some time. So in the interim, ARC will be scheduling meetings with each of the executive to refresh and articulate their top immediate concerns given the current environment, which will then be reviewed and aligned with corporate objectives, which in turn can then be used to drive deeper discussions and/or board communications. And ultimately, as risk and resiliency management becomes more structured and executive decision-making is explicitly guided by risk appetite statements and quantifiable thresholds, it will ultimately help drive ARC's risk-based work plans, since we'll have more visibility to where performance is outside an acceptable range and where priorities demand attention. And so in this respect, I consider ARC's efforts to drive this review to be foundational in nature. Next, as I already sort of recapped regarding ARC's work on the ECC, the sign-off requirement drove awareness and accountability for legislative compliance, and it prompted proactive legal education in year one. So for year two, we will again be partnering with legal to provide refresher training and any other detailed training that executives deem necessary for their direct reports as part of their efforts to help drive down compliance expectations. And to aid in legal's education planning process, ARC will be asking each executive to essentially score the applicability of each of those 15 statutes and bylaws listed on the certificate from 1 to 10. And the results of which will then help to identify and prioritize specific tailored training needs, as well as identify possibly modules that cover broader compliance expectations that could be developed and incorporated into existing HR course curriculum. The scoring results will also be used by ARC to help validate the preliminary results of our mapping exercise, where we have mapped existing policies, procedures, and processes to those legislative requirements. Because the scoring will essentially identify which executives have the deeper level of understanding and expectations and requirements for compliance. And in turn, this work will again help drive our future work plans to give attention and focus where executives probably would appreciate compliance audit work. And finally, all the issues noted by the executives on last year's certificates prompted ARC to do follow-up work, clarifying roles, responsibilities, and the nature of those noted concerns. And we will be summarizing the results of that follow-up work and the related observations to ensure that any action plans that are necessary are established and tracked to completion. And it's my intent that we will submit a summary of those issues and tracking report to the CEO as part of the year two package, which will then come to the ARMC probably early next year. And that's the final comment that I have on this, is that last year's certificate did cover a period of October to September, but for this year, we're going to extend it to the end of December so that we now calendarize this process. Regarding fraud and risk assessments, again, I consider this to be a foundational initiative that we're embarking on. It ultimately helps to prioritize and drive targeted audit work by conducting proactive fraud risk assessments. And this is because we believe that conducting audits that focus on testing controls designed to prevent or detect fraud should be part of a broader ethics program, if only to serve as a deterrent. So while investigation services within HR is driving the development of a broader ethics program, and investigative services does respond to integrity line complaints and other tips, now that investigative services have made progress with their data dashboards and are more comfortable with the data that they've been gathering, ARC is reaching out and we're interested in leveraging the results of that available information and have sort of done some initial work to understand the fraud schemes investigated. and therefore that will supplement our fraud risk assessments, and it also gives us an opportunity possibly to do joint messaging around fraud risk concerns and raising the awareness of fraud risk with accountable executives in the ARMC. Regarding audit follow-up, last year we spent a lot of time following up on AG recommendations and ensuring that new accountable executives understood the underlying issues and what needed to be done to bring closure to those AG's outstanding recommendations. We provided a lot of behind-the-scenes instructions on what evidence should be gathered to provide to the AG to support closure, as well as we put forth arguments to the AG to bring closure to items that executives felt were no longer applicable or relevant. So now I'm essentially turning our attention to do the same for our past ARC audits, essentially revisiting some of the areas of risks and gaps that we highlighted in those audit reports. And we're doing refreshed analytic work to provide new insights and or to assess the effectiveness of any implemented actions. Now that we've shifted back to now that we've shifted to a hybrid work model at TTC, ARC and business group staff have the ability to get back on site and reconnect, and we can make physical observations and walkthroughs of what are still very manual processes that may or may not be the same as they were pre-COVID. But I know for at least 2 years, independent eyes have not really been checking compliance. So in addition to identifying targeted audit work through that proactive fraud lens, I'm essentially jumpstarting our assurance work by initiating audit follow-up in areas that management has either expressed interest in for us to come back and take a look at, or where I think comparison of pre-post pandemic processes and controls is a good starting point. Regarding metric development and accuracy, I certainly have come to the AMC prior, expressing where we've developed some metrics and are using data to drive our work terms, and identifying areas that would benefit from a deeper dive. And this has been an intentional part of ARC's evolution over the recent years to use the data that's available. And whether we're proactively developing metrics to identify anomalies and trends that we think are worthy of investigation as part of our audit work, or supporting the development of risk indicators for operational areas as part of executive grassroots efforts, this is an element of risk management that ARC can support without compromising our independence. But a key element of this type of work is that we must assess the quality of the data that we are having access to, and as well as the sustainability of operational staff doing similar analyses that we designed for them. And so now that the progress around the advanced analytics and the creation of a center of excellence has been formally introduced as part of a broader digital transformation goal, I think it's a good time to clarify roles and responsibilities around validating data, data ownership, data governance, because we want to ensure the accuracy of any of these metrics as they get developed going forward. Cybersecurity is and will remain a top corporate risk at the TTC. A lot of work has already gone into improving TTC's security posture since the ransomware incident. And certainly keeping the board informed of those actions. I know AMC members have urged the TTC to proactively do their own penetration testing and vulnerability assessments, especially of operating systems, and to not wait for the AG. And it is my understanding that while the AG has not initiated her work, ITS is planning on conducting ATC security testing. So I'm simply highlighting on our plan that I want to stay abreast of the outcomes of these these reviews, because if there's any specific recommendations that we can support or certainly keep eyes on to drive to completion, that's what we're going to do. Finally, regarding dashboards. So again, dashboards that help communicate key metrics for monitoring ransomware and phishing attacks is something that I know the AMC has expressed interest in seeing. And since there is an expectation for ITS to provide an update on cybersecurity related matters at the end of the year, the next AMC. This is something that we would like to support and push to make happen. We have done some preliminary research and hope to have discussions with Dakshin and his team regarding his thoughts, because this is ultimately an IT deliverable. And again, recognizing that insurance is another mitigation tool, the topic of cyber insurance is something that I would like to cover to provide assurance that TTC is complying with eligibility requirements and any expanding requirements that are being placed on us as a result of the incident. This will likely start with initiating some high-level discussions with finance staff, IT staff, and legal to ensure that we're getting as much from our policy as possible and that the claim submission is meeting requirements. Regarding IT security, the topic of incident management security, we've already been continuing to have ongoing discussions with the embedded audit and compliance specialists within IT to understand her areas of work focus. And I would like to explore the option to conduct a joint project in the future that would effectively support the delivery of combined assurance on these matters. And like I noted above, we can certainly start by ensuring that key IT risk metrics are being identified and reported out, and in turn can then highlight where a joint audit would be most beneficial in our 2023 work plan. Regarding the asset retirement obligations, as I've said, financial reporting issues don't normally catch my eye, but the new PSAB accounting standard does increase estimation risk. And finance is doing a lot of heavy lifting to coordinate with the city and with several internal stakeholders to drive the decision-making assumptions and the complicated estimates, which may increase the audit fees for next year. But I am interested also in understanding the link between work that's being done here with the municipal asset planning expectations. And obviously that's part of the, the legislative lens that we apply. But at this point, I'm simply trying to keep my finger on the pulse as progress is made to meet this standard and to ensure any slippages in finances implementation schedule or challenges that they're experiencing are escalated and resolved before they become problematic. And based on my most recent conversations with finance, although there was some slippage in their original November 21 timeline, they're quite confident that their mitigation plans are in place to address capacity issues and skill set issues. And therefore, nobody's losing any sleep at this point and feel things are on track to meet the ultimate goal of having this standard implemented and applied to the 2023 statements. But I'll continue to check in with finance. And of course, we've extended our offer of support since I expect that the gathering of the documentation will be challenging. So we will do whatever we can to make sure that happens for Alex and his team. And finally, in the last item, I'm really just highlighting that by mid-June, ARC staff will have completed a ministry required specified procedures review and submitted the results in accordance with the July 1st due date with no major issues noted. These procedures we complete are specified by the Ministry of Transportation, and ARC satisfies the requirement for professionally accredited staff to complete the work every 3 years. As in past years, we worked with OT staff to coordinate this work. It did require ARC staff to work on site full time since the beginning of April 22, because the training records are still manual and site visit observations of operator training is part of the stipulated audit procedures we have to complete. So special thanks to the team that agreed to do this work. So that's essentially what I hope to achieve in the rest of 2022 going into 2023. So if there's any questions or comments, happy to entertain them.
Thank you very much, Christine. Very thorough report. Any questions from the committee? Julie, any questions?
Yeah, just one. You were talking about the risk management review and your early part of building up this work is executive discussions. And I'm wondering if it would be possible for members of this committee who are interested to take part in that exercise.
certainly from my perspective, as people were speaking earlier today on this call, I kind of made that note myself to reach out to each AMC member to get your contributions. I think it's important that in the end, there's an alignment. And maybe that's also an element to include in the review to make sure that the consultant considers that as well. But happy to entertain any other thoughts from Joanne or Ron on that.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's it. But count me down as interested. So thank you.
For sure, Julie, for sure.
Duly noted. Joanne, any questions of Christine?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Christine. Yeah, any good train? I'm always up for training. I can. You're never too old to be trained, is my my attitude. And by the way, as we get older, we become more more forgetful. So probably more training is needed than.
Or a trail of yellow sticky notes between you and the front door.
Exactly. So the you've highlighted and gave us some really thorough report on each of the 9 areas of focus that ARC is in the ARC work plan. To just remind us, how are these 9 identified? Do you get external third-party input? Are there do you follow best practices? And then, identifying them, are they done internally? Are they done through, the inclusion of the executive leadership team? So just remind us of how they're
For sure.
they're put
Well,
together.
Again, having been here for 24 plus years, I always put that historical spin on things. So certainly, for the majority of my time in internal audit under past CEOs, or not past CEO, but chief auditors, we followed that traditional cyclical approach where, every department or section within departments got covered off, every 3 to 5 years. And we reported out on that. However, the limitations of that is it did not allow you to do an end-to-end sort of process or program review. And quite honestly, when you put specific audits and departments on an audit list, everybody looked at it, saw, oh, good, I'm not on the list this year. And so if you come to me, start asking questions, why are you asking me questions? That's another department. Now, the good news is that has changed tremendously over the last few years in terms of openness and cooperation. And possibly I'd like to think it's attributed to a shift in recognizing that audits aren't here to just hit you up with all your problems, but we've been trying to work with the groups to identify where their concerns are and offer more support, certainly through that advisory element of how to set up good controls. As far as the identification of the work plan, it's really all of the above. It's recognizing what is out there in terms of current information around where are risks for transit. We certainly drove the survey that was done a few years ago where we were asked to respond, what are the risks from the transit agency perspective, and so that gave us insight into where other transit agencies are focusing attention. There's the traditional variables that you consider, which certainly the AG considers, and again, we supported completion of her 5-year review. So it's the traditional things. Where's the money being spent? Where's there been a lot of change in the organization? Technology, where's the technology being used to drive change in processes, and just change in processes by nature are an open area for reviewing and areas of risk. And I think what I refer to this foundational work is if and when there is more structured ERM programs and that visibility to the board and alignment and more risk thresholds being monitored, then it becomes a lot easier for us to know where we should be putting our attention on compliance work because it will be quite evident where things are beyond that acceptable range or comfort level, and therefore it's the red flag for us to go in. But in the meantime, where I've been speaking about developing metrics, and this has been part of ARC's evolution, as more data has become available, we are continuously trying to find ways to use it, short of running into problems with data quality issues, but that in and of itself highlights where we need to do work, because we want to use those metrics to identify where, again, possibly there's anomalies or trends that need to be looked into more deeply. But those metrics aren't necessarily the ones that are being prepared and put forward, at least not in the public forum, but behind the scenes, they may be getting developed. So I hope that answers your question, but sometimes it's just what's in my head and my sense of where we need to go or where we can support work. And certainly it's always been about listening to questions that are raised both at this committee and the board, to keep my sense of where things need to go in terms of providing transparently more information around those risks and processes. So long-winded answer, I know.
No, that's good. And you know, my sense too, as you took us through the report, which I find really encouraging, is that the leadership team is clearly evolving to seeing the work that your unit does as assisting, you know, like again, pointing out the risk issues and risk areas will just make everybody, and getting that data and working through the issues and the problems just makes everybody better managers and better able to manage their units. So good to see that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. I didn't have any questions, so I will entertain a motion to receive this report for information. Joanne, if you'll make that motion.
I so move.
Okay. Julie, you're in favor?
In favor.
Okay, that is carried. So I think that takes us to the end of our agenda. I will now also entertain a motion to adjourn. And Julie, I'll let you make that motion.
So moved.
Okay, and you're in favor, Joanne, as am I. Thank you very much, everybody. Very good meeting.
you.
Appreciate all the support from TTC management. Thank you.
Yeah, good meeting.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.